Elsie Jennings stood with spilled beer soaking her faded blue dress, while the men in Dunleavy's saloon laughed, as if her hunger were part of the entertainment. The owner had just shoved her songbook onto the floor and told her she could sing for pennies or sleep in the alley. Outside, a winter wind rattled the hitching rails, and inside, her last coin lay under a gambler's muddy boot. She bent for it anyway, cheeks burning, throat too dry to beg. At the door, a cold-eyed cowboy marshal named Samuel Carter had only come for flour, coffee, and cartridges. But what he saw in that room changed the road beneath his boots. Before the dust rises, write your country in the comments so I know where this story found you. If you enjoy lonely cowboys, brave women, and love that heals old wounds, subscribe for the next tale. By dusk, every lamp in Dunleavy's saloon had been lit, though none of that yellow light made the place feel warm. Smoke hung low over the card tables, spurs scraped the floorboards. A cracked mirror behind the bar gave back crooked reflections of men who had lost money, temper, or mercy before supper. Elsie Jennings stood on the little platform near the piano, one hand pressed to her ribs where the saloon owner had grabbed her too hard that afternoon. Her dress had once been blue, the kind of soft color a girl might wear to church beside her mother. Now the hem was stained dark from wet streets. The sleeves had been mended twice with thread that did not match, and one shoulder hung loose where a drunk had caught it with a ring. She sang because there was no other coin left to earn. Her voice was not loud, but it carried. It had a worn sweetness to it, like a hymn remembered from childhood and dragged through too many hard miles. When she sang, even the piano player softened his pounding hands for a few breaths. But nobody in Dunleavy's looked at her like she was a woman singing. They looked at her like she was another bottle on the shelf. "Smile, Elsie," Virgil Dunleavy called from the bar. He was thick-necked, with oiled hair and small, watchful eyes. Men pay better for sunshine. Elsie lifted her chin, but she did not smile. That was when Rafe Bell, a gambler with silver buttons on his vest and cruelty in his grin, tossed a copper penny onto the stage. It struck her shoe and spun. "There," he said. "Enough for the song, not enough for supper." The men laughed. Elsie kept singing. She had learned that stopping brought worse than laughter. She finished the verse with her hands still and her face pale. The penny stopped near the edge of the platform. Before she could reach for it, Rafe stepped forward and placed his boot over it. "Want it?" he asked. The room quieted just enough for her shame to be heard. Elsie looked at the boot, then at the hungry space beyond the swinging doors where the cold waited. She had not eaten since morning. Even that had been half a biscuit, hidden behind a flour sack in the kitchen after Virgil said she owed him too much for meals. She bent down. A woman at the far table whispered, "Lord help her," but no one moved. Elsie's fingers touched the edge of Rafe's boot. He ground the penny into the floorboards. "Sing lower next time," he said. "A voice like that makes a man think you believe you're better than him." Elsie pulled her hand back, as if burned. The saloon doors opened behind him. A draft entered first, sharp with snow and horse sweat. Then came a man in a trail coat, dusted white at the shoulders, his hat pulled low, his face lean and hard as winter bark. A badge rested on his vest, dull from wear. His gun belt hung plain, not showy. His boots carried mud from a long road. Samuel Carter had ridden into town for supplies and nothing more. Cedar Ridge was not his town. He held a marshal's commission for the northern pass and the settlements scattered beyond it. He came twice a month, bought coffee, flour, salt, cartridges, lamp oil, and sometimes nails if the line cabin had suffered another windstorm. He never stayed for drinking, never played cards, and never gave anyone reason to think he cared about their troubles. Folks called him cold because he did not waste words. They also called him fair, but usually from a distance. Samuel paused just inside the doors. His eyes moved once across the room, taking in the gambler, the boot, the coin, the woman on the platform, the wet stain down her dress. And Virgil, Dunleavy watching with satisfaction instead of concern. The piano player stopped. Virgil cleared his throat. Marshal Carter, didn't expect you till morning. Road's turning bad, Samuel said. His voice was low even, and dry as a match not yet struck. He crossed to the bar. His spurs sounded slow, not loud, but each step seemed to push the laughter farther back into the corners. I need 2 sacks of flour, he said. Coffee, salt, beans, cartridges for a Winchester, 12 gas shells. Wrap them dry. Virgil nodded toward a boy by the back room. Fetch from storage. Samuel set coins on the bar. Then his gaze dropped to the floor where Rafe still held the penny under his boot. You're standing on something that isn't yours, Samuel said. Rafe smiled. Just having sport. Samuel looked at him. It was not a threatening look. It was worse than that. It was the look of a man deciding whether trouble was worth the powder. Rafe moved his boot. The penny lay bent and dirty. Elsie did not reach for it. She stood straight now, but anyone looking close could see the tremble in her fingers. Samuel bent, picked up the penny, and placed it on the platform beside her shoe. He did not touch her. He did not say anything soft where the room could hear and turn it against her. Then he turned back to the bar. Virgil gave a short laugh. She owes me more than that penny, Marshal. Don't let the sad eyes fool you. I took her in when no one else would. Elsie's face went still. Samuel leaned one elbow on the bar. Did I ask? The room went quiet enough to hear sleet tapping the windows. Virgil's mouth tightened. No, then don't answer. The supply boy came in with flour sacks over his shoulder, grateful for something to do. Samuel counted the goods, but his attention did not leave the room. When Elsie stepped down from the platform, 2 men shifted to block her path toward the kitchen. Another song, Rafe said. My shift is done, Elsie replied. Done when Virgil says it is. Virgil wiped a glass. One more set, Elsie. Then my bay. You can have stew. Something inside her bent, but did not break. She turned back toward the platform. Samuel picked up one of his flour sacks and set it down again. How much for her supper? He asked. Virgil smiled slowly. That depends what supper you mean. A few men chuckled. Samuel's hand rested flat on the bar. Careful. The word carried no heat. That was why everyone heard it. Virgil swallowed. 20 cents for stew and bread. Samuel set down $50. Stew, bread, coffee. And she's sitting down. I don't need charity, Elsie said. It came out sharper than she meant. But pride was the last blanket she owned. Samuel looked at her for the first time, as if the room had vanished. His eyes were gray, tired, and unreadable. No, he said. You need what you earned. I heard the song from the street. Then he turned away, before gratitude could shame her further. Elsie stared at the coin on the bar. Something about the way he had said it made her throat tighten. Not pity, not purchase, earned. Virgil looked between them, measuring danger. Fine. Kitchen's cold, but she can eat out here, Samuel said. Virgil's face darkened. This is my place, and I'm still wearing my badge. For a moment, the saloon breathed like a living animal ready to bite. Then Virgil jerked his head toward a small table near the stove. Elsie walked to it alone. She sat with her back straight, though her knees felt weak beneath the table. A bowl came, thin stew, with more broth than meat, but steam rose from it. Bread followed. Coffee, too bitter and black. She kept her eyes down as she ate, because watching men watch her was worse than hunger. Samuel stood by the bar until his supplies were tied and stacked. He did not stare at her. He did not speak to her. That, more than anything, made him different. When she lifted the first spoonful to her mouth, the room slowly remembered its noise. Cards slapped. Chairs scraped. Someone cursed over dice. But shame did not leave Elsie. It only changed shape. By the time Samuel Carter carried his sacks outside to his pack horse, the sleet had turned to wet snow. Elsie finished the last of the bread and folded her hands in her lap. Virgil leaned close as he passed. Eat slow, songbird, he muttered. You'll pay for every bite. Elsie's fingers closed around the bent penny in her palm. Outside, Samuel tied the flower under canvas and tightened the rope with practiced hands. He should have ridden straight out. He had a pass to reach before the storm closed it, and a line cabin that would be dark if he wasted another hour. Instead, he looked back through the saloon window. Elsie Jennings sat alone beside the stove, seen by everyone and known by no one. And for the first time in years, Samuel Carter found that minding his own road felt like cowardice. Samuel did not go back into the saloon right away. He crossed the street to the Mercantile, where Mrs. Abel kept candles, thread, dried apples, and a Bible open near the register, whether she read it or not. She looked up when he entered. "Marshal Carter, storm's coming hard. I know. You staying over?" "No." She watched him collect coffee, tobacco. He did not smoke but traded with choppers and 2 wool blankets folded tight with twine. That pass will be mean tonight, meaner tomorrow. Mrs. Abel wrapped his goods and glanced toward Dunleavy's through the frosted window. "You saw what they did to that Jennings girl." Samuel placed coins on the counter. "Those town always watch." Her face flushed. "Some of us have tried." She wouldn't accept much. Why not? Pride. Fear. Virgil holds her debt. Says she signed for room, food, dresses, doctoring. Says she can't leave until it's paid. Did she sign? Mrs. Abel hesitated. She can read songs, not contracts. Samuel's jaw shifted once. How much? Virgil claims near $80. That was more than a winter's wages for many men, and a chain around a woman with no family. Mrs. Abel lowered her voice. She came through last spring with a traveling medicine show. Fever took the old woman who looked after her. The show left her behind. Virgil offered work. At first, she sang respectable. Then the jokes started. Then the grabbing. Then the debt. Samuel picked up the blankets. "You got a back room. For what?" "For a woman to sleep in without owing a devil interest." Mrs. Abel held his gaze. "She was no fool." "I do, but she has to choose it." "I know." When Samuel returned to the saloon, he found Elsie at the side door with a bucket in her hand. She had been sent to empty wash water into the alley. Snow clung to her hair and lashes. Her shawl was thin enough to see through. Virgil had not given her a coat. Samuel stopped several feet away, giving her space. A horse shifted at the rail behind him. From inside came drunken singing that had nothing to do with music. "Miss Jennings," she stiffened. "I ate what you paid for. Thank you. I'll find a way to return it." "I didn't come for that." Her eyes lifted, wary. He held out one of the wool blankets, still tie. "Mrs. Abel has a back room. Stove small, but the door locks from inside. She said you might sleep there night." Elsie looked at the blanket, as if it might be a trap with teeth. "What does she want?" "Nothing. Everybody wants something." Samuel nodded once, accepting the truth of it. "She wants you out of the snow. I want to know if you're free to walk across the street." Her mouth tightened. "Free is a word men use before they tell you the price." He did not answer quickly. That helped. At last he said, "Then don't take my word. Take the street. Take the lock. Take the room. In the morning you can decide again." The bucket trembled in her hand. "Virgil won't allow it. Virgil doesn't own the night. He thinks he owns me." Samuel's gaze moved to the bruised place near her wrist, where fingers had marked her skin. His face did not change, but something colder than the weather entered his eyes. "Knows he?" Elsie looked away. Snow melted down her temple like tears she refused to shed. "He owns the paper. That's enough in this town. Paper can be read. Not by me. Not the way men write it. I can read it." She gave a small, bitter laugh. "And if it says I owe him, then it says he is a thief with ink." Her eyes came back to him, startled. The saloon door banged open. Virgil stepped out, coat open over his vest, anger shining red in his cheeks. "Elsie, what are you doing whispering in the alley?" Samuel turned. "She's deciding where to sleep." Virgil's smile was ugly. "She sleeps where she owes." Samuel took one step down from the boardwalk. into the mud. Bring the paper. What paper? The one that makes you brave enough to say that. Virgil glanced toward the saloon windows. Men were watching. He did not like being challenged where his own kingdom could see. She has debt. Debt isn't a shackle unless a judge says so. She signed. Then bring it, Elsie whispered. Please, Don. Samuel heard the fear under the words. Not fear of truth. Fear of what truth might cost before it saved anything. He looked at her, and his voice softened by a measure. I won't drag you anywhere. That was the first time any man in Cedar Ridge had said such a thing, and made it sound like law. Virgil stepped close enough that Samuel could smell whiskey. You're passing through, Marshal. Don't stir my business. Samuel's right hand hung near his coat, not on his gun. I came for supplies. Then take them and ride. I will. Virgil smirked. Samuel looked past him to Elsie. Question is whether Miss Jennings wants to cross the street first. Every eye in the saloon window fixed on her. That was the cruelty of rescue. It made a woman choose in front of the same folks who had enjoyed her humiliation. Elsie's heart beat so hard it hurt. If she stayed, Virgil would make the night long. If she left, he would call her worse than ungrateful. He would say she sold herself to a marshal for a blanket and a bowl of stew. By morning, the town would shape the story to fit its appetite. Samuel seemed to understand that without being told. He set the blanket on a dry crate beside her, then stepped back. No hand on your arm, he said quietly. No bargain. You walk or you don't, for one breath. Elsie hated him for making it that honest. Then she set the bucket down. She picked up the blanket. Virgil cursed. You take one step, I add $10 to what you owe. Elsie flinched, but she stepped into the street. Samuel did not walk beside her. He walked behind and to the left, far enough that no one could say he led her, close enough that no one dared follow. Snow fell thicker. Mud sucked at Elsie's worn shoes. Halfway across, Rafe Bell called from the doorway. Marshall bought himself a songbird. Laughter rose. Samuel stopped. Elsie stopped too, afraid he would turn, afraid he would not. Samuel faced the saloon. Bell. Rafe's grin faded. You say her name with respect next time, and if I don't, then you'll learn to play cards left-handed. Nobody laughed after that. Elsie kept walking. Mrs. Abel opened the mercantile door before they reached it. She took one look at Elsie's face and moved aside without fuss. Room's warm enough, she said. There's water. A comb. I left a bit of soap. Elsie stood on the threshold. I can pay some. You can sweep in the morning if you care to, Mrs. Abel replied. Or not. The floor has survived worse than dust. Elsie looked back once. Samuel remained outside, snow on his hat, hands at his sides. Why? She asked him. The question was small, but it carried every hurt she had learned not to name. Samuel answered as if it were simple. Because I saw. Then he tipped his hat, turned to his horses, and began checking the knots on his supplies. Elsie stepped into the warm room. That night, she slept behind a locked door for the first time in months. She did not sleep well. Fear woke her at every sound, and hunger woke her when fear did not. But no hand shook her. No man shouted for another song. No boot ground her last coin into the floor. Across the street, Samuel Carter sat in the livery with his back against a stall wall and his coat over his shoulders. He could have taken a bed at the hotel, but the hotel stood beside the saloon, and Rafe Bell had friends. The storm thickened. Samuel listened to the wind and told himself he had only done what any decent man would do. But decency had been offered in Cedar Ridge before, and Elsie Jennings had still ended up on that platform. So before dawn, Samuel made a decision that would change both their lives. He would not ride out with only flour and coffee. He would take Virgil Dunleavy's paper to a judge, or he would tear the lie apart with his own hands. Morning came gray and mean, with snow pressed against doorways and wagon wheels frozen in ruts. Cedar Ridge moved slowly under it. Chimneys smoked, horses steamed. Men crossed the street with collars up, pretending not to look at the mercantile windows. Elsie had risen before Mrs. Abel, swept the store, stacked kindling, and washed the cups in the back room. She wore the same blue dress, but Mrs. Abel had pinned the torn shoulder and lent her a brown shawl thick enough to keep out some of the cold. "You don't have to earn every breath," Mrs. Abel said, watching her scrub a clean counter for the third time. Elsie paused. "I don't know how else to stand in a room." Mrs. Abel's face softened. "Then stand there and drink coffee." Elsie obeyed, because the woman made it sound like work. Samuel entered just after sunrise. He brought the storm in with him, along with the smell of leather and cold air. Elsie's hand tightened around her cup. He noticed and stopped near the door. "Morning, Marshal." Mrs. Abel set both hands on the counter. "Virgil sent a boy over before dawn," said Elsie. "Stole a red hair ribbon, a tin of peaches, and $5 from the till." Elsie went pale. "I didn't." "I know," Mrs. Abel said. Samuel removed his gloves slowly. "Did he put it in writing?" He told half the town out loud. "Easier that way." Elsie's cup rattled against the saucer. "Hell have me jailed, not for words thrown in snow," Samuel said. "You don't know this town." "No," he replied, "but I know men like him." That was when a small boy darted into the mercantile, nearly slipping on the wet boards. He was maybe 9, with hair too long over his eyes and a coat too short at the wrists. He carried a bundle of newspapers under one arm. "Miss Abel," he said breathlessly, "Mr. Dunleavy says nobody's to sell Miss Jennings anything on his credit. And if she comes near the saloon, hell." The boy stopped when he saw Elsie. Shame crossed his young face. "Sorry, ma'am." Elsie knelt, bringing herself level with him. "You only delivered the words, not the meanness." He looked surprised. "Yes, ma'am. What's your name?" "Toby Finch." "Toby," she said. "You've been running in that snow without breakfast. Your hands must be near frozen." He hid them behind his back. "I'm all right." Samuel watched from near the door. Elsie tore her piece of leftover bread in two and held half out to him. "Then take this for the road so I don't have to eat alone." Toby's eyes flicked to Mrs. Abel, who nodded. He took the bread and devoured it in 3 bites. Samuel said nothing, but something shifted in him. He had seen women act soft when watched. He had seen men perform kindness like a fiddle tune. Elsie had not known anyone was watching her face just then. She had given away half her breakfast while being hunted by hunger. That kind of pride was different from vanity. It was a fence around the last green place in her soul. When Toby left, Samuel set a folded paper on the counter. "I spoke with the livery man," he said. "Virgil's debt paper is in his safe. He won't show it unless a court orders him. Judge McCall is snowed in at Pike Crossing. Road won't clear for 2 days. My bad, Siri." Elsie closed her eyes. Mrs. Abel said, "Then she stays here." Samuel shook his head. "Hell keeps sending accusations. Men will start believing one just to be rid of trouble." "Where can she go?" Mrs. Abel asked. Samuel looked at Elsie. "Not around her. My place is 12 miles north, near Carter Hollow. It's a Marshall's line cabin and a small horse pasture. My aunt keeps house there when weather allows, but she's in the lower valley visiting kin. There's a spare room with a latch. I need someone to mend harness, cook when I'm gone, and help with 2 orphan calves I took in from a burned homestead." Elsie stared at him. "You're offering me work?" "Temporary, paid. Mrs. Abel can write the terms. You can keep a copy. What will people say?" "The same things they say now, only farther away." She almost smiled, but fear stopped it. "A woman alone at a Marshall's cabin. There's a boy named Toby who sleeps in my stable most nights because his father drank himself underground and his mother took fever. He can come as chaperone if Mrs. Abel agrees. He needs food and a roof too." Mrs. Abel lifted an eyebrow. "You just decided that?" Samuel looked toward the window where Toby's small tracks marked the snow. "Been deciding it longer than I admitted." Elsie studied him. "Why would you take in a boy you hardly know?" His face closed a little. "Because I know what it is to be left standing after a grave is filled." No one spoke. It was the first piece of himself Samuel had laid on the table, and he looked as if he regretted it. Mrs. Abel wrote the agreement in plain words. Elsie Jennings would work for wages at Carter Hollow. She owed Samuel Carter nothing beyond agreed labor. She would have private lodging, meals, and the right to leave. Mrs. Abel signed as witness. Toby, solemn with importance, signed with a crooked dex when asked to witness that he was coming along, willingly. Elsie held the paper like it might crumble. I can't read all of it. Samuel stepped back. Mrs. Abel can read it to you. I'll wait outside. That mattered. He did not read it himself and asked her to trust his voice. He left her with a woman and closed the door behind him. When they rode out an hour later, Elsie sat on the wagon bench with Toby between her and Samuel. Snow softened the ugly edges of Cedar Ridge, but it did not soften the faces watching from behind curtains. Virgil stood under the saloon awning, hat low. Rafe Bell leaned beside him, grinning. You'll crawl back, Virgil shouted. They all do. Elsie's hands clenched in her lap. Dot. Samuel gathered the reins. Miss Jennings. She looked at him. You don't have to answer every barking dog. Toby whispered. Me ma used to say that. Elsie looked down at the boy, and this time, she did smile. The road north climbed through cedar brakes and white fields. The wagon wheels groaned. The horses leaned into their collars. Samuel drove with steady hands, saying little except to warn of ruts. Toby fell asleep against Elsie's side by the 3rd mile, trusting her without permission. At Carter Hollow, the cabin sat beneath tall pines, its chimney crooked but smoking from banked holes Samuel had left ready days before. A small barn leaned nearby. Beyond it, fenced pasture held 3 horses and 2 calves bawling miserably at the weather. Elsie stepped down and sank ankle-deep into snow. It isn't much, Samuel said. She looked at the cabin, the smoke, the clean white quiet, and the latch on the spare room door when he showed it to her. It's more than the alley, she said. Work began at once because work made awkward, mercy easier to bear. Elsie heated beans, cut salt pork thin, and stretched cornmeal into cakes. Toby hauled kindling and tried to act stronger than he was. Samuel fed the horses, then brought in a calf half frozen at the ears. Elsie dropped to her knees near the stove. Blankets. Samuel brought them. The calf shivered violently. Elsie rubbed its sides with rough toweling while Toby warmed milk in a pan. You've done this before, Samuel said. My father kept 2 cows when I was small. Her voice softened at the memory. He said a creature can live through a bitter night if somebody bothers to keep rubbing warmth into it. Samuel watched her hands move. Sounds like he knew things. He did. Is he living? No, that ended the talk, but not harshly. Some grief did not need more words around it. They ate at the table after the calf settled. Beans, corn cakes, coffee, and dried apples. Mrs. Abel had tucked into the sack. Samuel waited until Elsie and Toby served themselves before he took anything. Elsie noticed. So did Toby. The boy ate like a starved pup, then fell asleep in a chair. Elsie rose to move him, but Samuel lifted the boy with surprising care and carried him to a cot by the hearth. He trusts you, Elsie said softly. He trusts food. No, she said. Children know the difference. Samuel stood over the sleeping boy, his face half shadowed by firelight. I hope you're wrong. Knowing the difference costs them. Elsie heard the old wound in that. She did not press it. Later, when the wind rose and the cabin walls creaked, Samuel stepped outside to check the barn. He returned with snow in his hair and found Elsie mending a torn harness, strapped by lamplight. Her singing came under her breath, barely sound at all. Not a saloon song, a hymn. Samuel hung his coat by the door and stood still for a moment, listening. Elsie stopped when she noticed him. I'm sorry for singing, for forgetting where I was. He looked around the cabin. Toby asleep, calf breathing by the stove. Beans warm on the hearth, the torn harness growing whole in her hands. You're not in Dunleavy's, he said. Elsie lowered her eyes, and the needle trembled once. No, she whispered. I'm trying to learn that. For 3 days, snow held Carter Hollow apart from the world. In that white silence, Elsie began to learn the shape of ordinary mornings. She woke before dawn, not because someone shouted, but because the stove needed feeding. She made coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in, kneaded biscuits with cold fingers, and laughed once when Toby got flour on his nose and tried to deny it. The sound surprised all three of them. Samuel looked up from cleaning his rifle. Toby grinned. "You laughed, Miss Elsie." "I did not." "You did?" Samuel's mouth almost moved into a smile. "Almost." Elsie saw it and turned quickly back to the dough, warmth rising in her cheeks. It was dangerous, how a small kindness could become something a hungry heart reached for. She worked hard, too hard, Samuel thought. She scrubbed already clean pans, mended socks with tiny stitches, brushed the horses until their coats shone, and sang to the calves when they bawled. One calf, a red heifer with a white star, began following her whenever she entered the barn. Toby named it Queen, because she acts gran, he said. Elsie scratched the calf's head. "My bay, she simply knows her worth." Samuel heard that from the stall door and carried the words with him the rest of the day. On the fourth morning, the sky cleared blue and brittle. Samuel saddled to ride into Cedar Ridge for the judge's notice and news of the road. Elsie packed biscuits in a cloth. "You don't have to feed me like I'm riding to war," he said. "I feed anyone leaving before breakfast." He took the bundle. Their fingers almost touched. Not quite. Toby came running from the barn. "Can I ride along?" "No," Samuel said. The boy's face fell. Samuel tightened the cinch. "You can help Miss Jennings with Queen. If I'm not back by dark, stack extra wood inside." The instruction was practical, but Elsie heard the trust in it. Samuel Carter expected to return to a home that now included her and the boy. That thought frightened her more than Virgil's threats. Samuel rode into town near noon. Cedar Ridge looked cleaner in sunlight, but only from a distance. Up close, it was the same place with fresh snow hiding old mud. At the sheriff's office, he found Sheriff Amos Vale leaning back, with boots on his desk. Vale was a soft man in a hard job, elected because he bothered no one important. "Carter," Vale said, "heard you rode off with Dunleavy's singer." "I rode off with a hired woman and a child who needed shelter." Vale winced. "Folks ain't calling it that. Folks can learn." Virgil filed complaint. "Theft, breach of contract, enticement. Says you interfered with lawful debt." "Where's the contract?" "In his safe." Then he filed smoke. Vale sighed. "He's got friends on the town council. They don't want trouble. They should stop making it." Samuel went to Judge McCall, who had just arrived from Pike Crossing with a wrapped scarf and a temper sharpened by travel. The judge listened, read Mrs. Abel's copy of the work agreement, and frowned. "I can order Dunleavy to produce the alleged contract," he said. "But until then, he can poison the town with talk. He already has." The judge studied Samuel. "You understand your position? A marshal taking a saloon singer into his cabin will draw complaint beyond Cedar Ridge. Men enjoy sin most when accusing it in others." Samuel's expression did not change. "I understand. Do you?" Samuel looked out the window toward the saloon. "I understand that a woman was hungry in a room full of men with money, and the only scandal is that nobody fed her before I did." The judge's pen paused. By late afternoon, Samuel had the order. He also had bad news. Virgil Dunleavy had sent a rider south to Samuel's district office, claiming Samuel had a bust his badge for personal interest. A hearing would be called. Until then, Samuel's authority could be questioned. He left the office and found Rafe Bell waiting by the hitching rail. "Marshal," Rafe said. "Or is that still true?" Samuel untied his horse. Rafe leaned closer. "A man should be careful whose honor he buys. Women like Elsie Jennings can sing sweet in one room and lie sweet in another." Samuel's hand moved so fast, Rafe did not see it until his back hit the post. Samuel had him by the coat front, not choking, only holding. "Say her name right," Samuel said. Rafe's face went pale. "Jennings, Miss Jennings." Rafe swallowed. "Miss Jennings." Samuel released him. "Good," He rode back under a sky turning iron at the edges. At Carter Hollow, trouble had already arrived. Virgil stood in the yard with 2 men and Sheriff Vale's deputy, a young fellow named Clint Roy, who looked ashamed of his own boots. Elsie stood on the porch, one hand on Toby's shoulder. The boy held a stove poker like a sword. Virgil smiled when Samuel rode in. There he is, the noble rescuer. Samuel dismounted slowly. You're trespassing. I came for what's mine. Elsie's face tightened, but she did not step back. Deputy Roy cleared his throat. Mr. Dunleavy says Miss Jennings is bound by debt and must return pending hearing. Show me that warrant, Samuel said. Roy looked miserable. Ain't exactly a warrant. Then it's exactly nothing. Virgil lifted a folded paper. Contract. Samuel held out his hand. Virgil hesitated. Samuel stepped forward. At last, Virgil handed it over. Samuel read. His eyes hardened with every line. Elsie watched his face. What does it say? Samuel did not soften the truth. It says you borrowed $8 for lodging and food, then agreed to repay through wages. It also adds charges after the signature. Dresses, medicine, breakage, interest. I didn't know. I know. Virgil pointed. Signatures there. Samuel looked closer. The added charges are written in different ink. Expenses came later. Expenses came later. Then they came without agreement. Virgil's voice rose. She belongs at my place till paid. Samuel folded the paper once. Women don't belong to places. The words struck Elsie harder than any shout. Virgil turned to the deputy. You hear him? He's protecting his own sin now, Toby shouted. She ain't done nothing. Elsie pulled him back. Toby, Virgil sneered, even got the orphan trained. Samuel's face went still in a way Elsie had come to recognize. It was the stillness before a storm broke trees. Leave, he said. Virgil smiled. Oh, what? You shoot a businessman over a saloon girl. That was the cruel hook. The words hung in the yard, waiting to see if Elsie would bleed. She stepped off the porch before Samuel could answer. My name is Elsie Jennings, she said. Her voice shook, but it carried. I worked for you. You did not buy me. I sang in your saloon because I was hungry and alone, and because you made sure staying hungry felt worse than being laughed at. But you did not buy me. No one moved. Samuel looked at her as if seeing more than courage. He saw the cost of it. Virgil's face twisted. You'll regret that speech. I already regret the silence before it, she said. Deputy Roy stared at the snow. Samuel handed him the contract. Take that to Judge McCall. Tell Sheriff Vale I'll appear at any lawful hearing. Tell him if he sends men without paper again, I'll lock them in my barn until they remember the law. Roy nodded quickly. Virgil backed toward his horse, but his eyes promised worse. This ain't done, Marshal, Samuel said. It is for tonight. After they rode away, Elsie stood trembling in the yard. Samuel wanted to put his coat around her, but she already had her shawl, and pride could be bruised even by warmth if offered wrong. So he took off his coat and handed it to Toby. Put that around Miss Jennings, he said. Your hands are cleaner than mine. Toby obeyed with solemn care. Elsie looked at Samuel over the boy's head. Her eyes shone, but no tears fell. Thank you, she whispered. Samuel nodded once. You spoke for yourself. I was afraid. I know. You didn't stop me. No, he said. I figured you'd been stopped enough. That night, kindness was no longer enough. They all knew it. Virgil had money, friends, and a town eager to believe the worst, because the worst asked less of them. But in the small cabin, under the coat Samuel had pretended not to offer, Elsie sat by the fire and understood something new. Fear might still follow her, but it no longer walked alone. The hearing was set for Saturday in the Cedar Ridge Church because the courthouse roof had leaked through the judge's desk. News traveled faster than mercy. By Friday evening, everyone in 3 settlements knew Marshal Samuel Carter was accused of stealing a saloon singer from lawful debt, and Elsie Jennings was accused of theft, loose conduct, and ingratitude. That last charge, though not written, seemed to offend the town most. Samuel spent Friday repairing a broken fence rail with more force than the job required. Elsie watched from the barn door as he drove nails into frozen wood. "You're angry," she said. He set another nail. "Yes, at me?" The hammer stopped. Samuel turned. "No." The answer came so quickly that Elsie had to look away. Inside the barn, Toby brushed Queen with serious devotion. The calf leaned into him, eyes half closed. Elsie stepped into the cold yard. "You could still say I tricked you. Men would believe it. Your badge might survive." Samuel's jaw tightened. "Don't offer me a coward's road and call it kindness." She flinched. Regret crossed his face at once. Elsie. It was the first time he had used her given name without miss before it. She held still. He removed his hat. Snowlight made the lines around his eyes deeper. "I'm sorry. That was rough spoken." It was true. No, it was fear with boots on. He looked toward the distant road. "I buried a wife 8 years ago." Elsie's breath caught. Samuel kept his eyes away as he spoke, as if confession was easier when aimed at the horizon. "Margaret, fever took her and our little girl in the same week. After that, folks brought food, scripture, advice. Then they brought widows to meet me. Then they stopped bringing anything because I stopped opening the door." "I'm sorry," Elsie said. He nodded once, accepting the words without letting them touch too deep. "I learned to keep my heart like a locked barn. Useful, weatherproof, empty." Elsie's throat tightened. He looked back at her. "Then I walked into Dunleavy's for flour and saw a woman bend for a penny while every man in the room let her. I have not slept right since." "That isn't love," she whispered, frightened by the word and ashamed for wanting it near. "No," Samuel said. "It's a beginning I don't know what to do with." The honesty stood between them, fragile and warm. Elsie folded her arms around herself. If you lose your badge because of me, I won't lose it because of you. I'll lose it because I used it for what it was meant for, and some men prefer a badge that looks away." The next morning, Cedar Ridge gathered early. Women filled the front pews in dark dresses, whispering behind gloves. Men stood along the walls. Virgil sat near the stove in a fine coat, his hair slicked and his expression wounded, as if he were the injured party. Rafe Bell leaned behind him with a swollen lip he claimed came from slipping on ice. Elsie entered between Mrs. Ebel and Toby. The room shifted. Some eyes pitied her. Most judged her. A few looked down, and that was almost worse. Samuel came in last and stood near the door. He wore his badge. He also wore the plain black coat he used for funerals. Judge McCall called the hearing to order. Virgil spoke first. He was polished. He described himself as a generous businessman who had sheltered a destitute woman, clothed her, fed her, and been repaid with theft and betrayal. He held up the contract. He listed charges in a voice full of injury. $84.16, he said. "That is what she owes. I ask she be returned to my establishment till such debt is lawfully repaid." A murmur went through the church. Judge McCall turned to Elsie. "Miss Jennings, did you steal from Mr. Dunleavy?" "No, sir." "Did you understand the debt as written?" I understood $8. I did not understand the rest, because it was not there when I put my name." Virgil smiled sadly. "A convenient memory." Samuel's hand curled at his side, but he stayed silent. The judge called Mrs. Abel, who testified to the night Elsie came to her store, the condition of her clothes, and the work agreement written in plain terms. Then Toby, who stood barely tall enough to be seen over the witness rail, said Elsie had given him bread when she had little of her own. Some laughed softly, but the judge did not. "Kindness might not settle a debt," the judge said, "but it does speak to character." Then Samuel was called. Virgil's lawyer, a narrow man from Pike Crossing, rose with satisfaction. "Marshal Carter, did you pay for Miss Jennings' meal?" I drove the wagon. A few men chuckled before the judge silenced them. Did you have affection for her at that time? The room held its breath. Samuel looked at Elsie. Not long, just enough. I had respect, he said. The lawyer smiled. And now, Samuel's face did not change. More respect. Virgil's lawyer turned to the judge. This is a man hiding personal feeling under authority. Samuel spoke before he could stop himself. Better than hiding cruelty under business. The judge struck the table with his gavel. Marshal Carter. Samuel lowered his head. Apologies. Then came the blow Samuel had expected. A district letter was read aloud. Pending review, Samuel Carter was to surrender active authority in matters involving Virgil Dunleavy or Elsie Jennings, due to possible conflict. A whisper moved through the church like wind through dry grass. Virgil smiled. The judge looked troubled. Marshal, your badge. Elsie stood. No, Samuel turned slightly. She stepped into the aisle. No, Your Honor. Don't take from him what men like Virgil never used rightly in the first place. The judge's eyes softened, but his voice remained firm. Miss Jennings, sit down. Samuel removed the badge from his vest. It was small in his palm, scratched and dulled by years of dust, rain, blood, and duty. He crossed to the judge and laid it on the table. Elsie covered her mouth. Samuel returned to his place without looking at anyone. The lawyer seemed pleased. Now that authority is removed, perhaps we can settle the debt plainly. I'll pay it, Samuel said. The room erupted. Elsie turned on him. No, Samuel looked at her. It ends today. It will not end if you buy my freedom. It will only change who folks say owns me. That struck him silent. Elsie faced the judge. Her hands shook, but her voice did not. I will work lawful wages. I will pay what I truly owe. But I will not return to that saloon. And I will not let any man pay $80 of lies and call it mercy. Virgil stood. You ungrateful, said, Judge McCall said. And for once the town heard iron in him. The church doors opened before anyone else could speak. Old Ben Harker, the livery man, came in with his hat in his hands and snow on his boots. Judge, he said, breathless. I got something. Virgil's face changed. Ben walked forward holding a small ledger. Virgil left this in my office last fall when he rent his storage. I didn't read it then, but after what's been said, I looked. That's theft, Virgil shouted. Ben ignored him. It lists wages held back from girls who sang at Dunleavy's. Charges added. Names, amounts, some are paid, though I know those women left with nothing. Judge McCall took the ledger. Virgil lunged, but Samuel moved without badge or hesitation. He caught Virgil by the arm and turned him hard into the pew. No gun, no violence beyond what was needed, just enough to stop him. Judge McCall read in silence. The room changed as truth entered it. Not all at once. People resisted it. Shame makes a poor guest. But line by line, the ledger showed what Virgil had done. Elsie's name was there. $8 became $84 by ink and appetite. Judge McCall closed the book. Mr. Dunleavy, this court finds no lawful claim requiring Miss Jennings to return to your establishment. Further, I am ordering a full review of your accounts and holding this ledger as evidence. Virgil's face went gray. The judge turned to Elsie. Miss Jennings, you owe the original $8, less wages unlawfully withheld. By my calculation, Mr. Dunleavy owes you $12.40. For a moment, Elsie did not understand. Then Toby whispered, he owes you. A sound moved through the church. Not laughter. Not quite apology. Something smaller and more ashamed. Judge McCall looked at Samuel. As for Marshal Carter, district review will proceed, but I will write my account of this hearing. Samuel nodded. Elsie stepped toward the table. Your Honor, may I say something? You may. She turned to the room that had watched her bend for a penny. I sang in a saloon, she said. I was hungry. I was frightened. I wore what I had. I endured what I could not stop. Some of you saw me and decided that was all I was. Her eyes found Mrs. Abel, then Toby, then Samuel. But a woman is not the worst room she ever stood in. She is not the cruelest name put on her. She is not the debt. A man writes, after she sighs. My name is Elsie Jennings. I can work. I can sing. I can tell the truth. And I will not be ashamed of surviving. No one clapped. This was not that kind of victory. Instead, hats came off, one by one. Samuel Carter, badge gone from his vest, stood near the door and watched the town lower its eyes. Before the woman it had misjudged. Outside, snow began to fall again, but softer now. When Elsie walked out of the church, Samuel waited at the steps. He did not touch her in front of everyone, though every part of him wanted to offer steadying. You kept your pride, he said. She looked at his empty vest. You gave up your badge. I laid it down. That ain't the same as giving up. What will you do if they don't return it? He looked toward the horses waiting in the snow. Fix fence. Raise calves. Keep Toby from teaching Queen to eat my hat. A laugh broke from her, small and tearful. Then she grew serious. And me. Samuel met her eyes. You decide what road is yours. If it runs by Carter Hollow while, there's paid work and a locked room. If it turns elsewhere, I'll hitch the wagon. Elsie looked at his bare hand, then at the whole town, pretending not to watch from behind church windows. Slowly, she took his hand, only for a moment, only long enough for warmth to pass between them. Then she let go and climbed into the wagon with Toby. But Samuel felt that touch all the way home. Spring did not arrive all at once in Carter Hollow. It came in drips from the eaves, in mud under the barn door, in Queen kicking up her heels across the pasture, in Toby growing an inch, because supper came every night and sleep came without fear. Elsie stayed. At first, she told herself it was because she had wages to earn and nowhere better to go. Then she told herself it was because Toby needed lessons in letters, because Queen refused milk from anyone else, because Mrs. Abel's back room was too small, because the road south was poor. At last, she stopped explaining. She worked, and her hands grew steadier. She sewed curtains from flour sacks and embroidered tiny blue flowers along the edges. She planted beans beside the cabin wall when the ground softened. She sang while kneading bread, while brushing horses, while teaching Toby to read from old wanted posters Samuel had saved for kindling. The first time she sang with the window open, Samuel stopped outside with an armload of wood and closed his eyes. He did not interrupt. He had learned that Elsie's songs were not invitations for men to take from her. They were signs that some locked room inside her had found a window. The district hearing came in late April. Samuel rode to Pike Crossing alone. He returned at sundown with mud on his horse and his badge in his pocket. Elsie met him by the gate, trying not to look too eager. Well, she asked. He took out the badge. Judge McCall's letter helped. So did Virgil, trying to bribe the clerk. He did? Badly. She smiled, and Samuel pinned the badge back on his vest without ceremony. Then he removed it again and held it out to Toby, who had come running from the barn. Keep that in the house tonight, Samuel said. Needs polishing. Toby held it like a holy relic. Yes, sir. Elsie watched the boy race inside. You trust him with it, more than I trust most men. Samuel leaned his arms on the gate. For a moment they stood side by side, looking at the pasture where Queen grazed under the pale gold light. I've been offered a wider district, he said. Elsie's heart tightened. Where? South and west? Better pay. More towns. When? I take it. June. She nodded, feeling the old lesson rise. Do not hold what has not been given. That's good, she said. No. She looked at him. Samuel kept his gaze on the pasture. It's more money. That ain't always the same as good. What do you want? He was quiet so long she thought he would not answer. Then he said, "A home that doesn't feel like a grave with a stove in it." Elsie's breath trembled. Samuel turned to her. "I don't ask quick. I don't speak pretty. I've got grief behind me and work ahead, and some mornings I still wake colder than I ought to. But when you sing in that kitchen, this place remembers how to be alive." Her eyes filled. "Samuel." He reached into his coat and took out a folded paper. For one wild moment, she thought it was another contract, and fear crossed her face before she could hide it. He saw and lowered his hand. "Not a debt? What is it?" "A courtship agreement. If such a foolish thing exists." Mrs. Abel wrote it, "because I didn't trust myself not to sound like a fence post." Elsie laughed through tears. He unfolded it, embarrassed but steady. "It says I'm asking permission to court Elsie Jennings with honorable intention. No claim on her wages, no claim on her room, no expectation beyond what she freely gives. Witnessed by Mrs. Abel, Toby Finch, and Queen the calf. Though Queen's mark is mostly mud." Elsie pressed her hand to her mouth. Samuel looked miserable. "Too much?" "No," she whispered. "It's the first paper a man ever brought me that didn't try to take something." He held it out. This time, she took it. Their fingers touched and stayed. Courtship at Carter Hollow was not made of grand speeches. It was Samuel bringing Elsie the first wildflowers from the creek bank and pretending Toby had picked them, though Toby denied it loudly. It was Elsie setting aside the softest biscuit for Samuel without saying why. It was Samuel standing in the rain to fix the roof over her room first, while his own corner dripped into a pan. It was Elsie sitting beside him on the porch when old grief took his words away, not filling the silence, only sharing it. In May, Cedar Ridge held a church supper to raise money for the school roof. Mrs. Abel asked Elsie to sing. Elsie nearly dropped the plate. She was dry. "No," she said. Mrs. Abel did not push. "Think on it." The whole week, Elsie thought on it. She remembered Dunleavy's platform, Rafe's boot, the penny, the laughter. She remembered men looking at her as if her voice made her less worthy, not more. She remembered bending. On Saturday, she put on the blue dress Mrs. Abel had helped remake. The stained skirt had been cut and joined with fresh muslin. The torn shoulder was mended with careful lace. It was not fine, but it was hers. Samuel waited by the wagon. "You don't have to sing," he said. "I know. Toby and I can eat enough pie for 3 and bring you home early." She smiled. "That is a tempting offer." He helped her onto the wagon, his hand firm and respectful. Cedar Ridge looked different in spring. Mud still held the street, but flowers grew in window boxes. Dunleavy's saloon was closed, its windows boarded, while the court sorted through accounts. Virgil had fled before trial and been caught 2 towns over by a deputy who did not know enough to fear him. Rafe Bell had left Cedar Ridge entirely. At the church supper, people greeted Elsie carefully, some too warmly, some too quietly. Apology is awkward when pride must crawl before it can stand. Sheriff Vale removed his hat. "Miss Jennings, Sheriff, I was wrong to send Clint that day." "Yes," she said. He nodded, accepting the plainness. "I'm sorry." "Thank you." That was all. It was enough for the moment. Toby stayed close, wearing a shirt Elsie had sewn and shoes Samuel had bought under protest from the boy, who insisted he could grow into them even if they were already tight. Mrs. Abel fussed over everyone. Judge McCall carved ham with judicial seriousness. When the meal ended, the church grew expectant. Elsie stood near the piano. Her hands were cold. Samuel came to her side, not crowding her. "Look at me if the room gets too loud. I might be there." She stepped onto the small platform at the front of the church. For a heartbeat, she was back in the saloon. Smoke, laughter, a boot over a penny, hunger sharp as a blade. Then she saw Toby in the front row, sitting straight with pride. She saw Mrs. Abel dabbing her eyes before the song even began. She saw Samuel Carter standing at the back, hat in hand, badge on his vest, heart in his eyes, though his face remained still. Elsie sang, not for pennies, not for stew, not because any man ordered it. She sang an old hymn about crossing troubled waters and finding rest on the far bank. Her voice trembled at first, then steadied, then rose until the rafters seemed to hold it gently. No one laughed, no one spoke. The room received the song like a gift it had not earned, but badly needed. When the last note faded, silence remained. Then Toby clapped, one small pair of hands. Mrs. Abel joined. Then the judge, then the room. Hats came off again, but this time not from shame, from honor. Elsie stepped down with tears on her cheeks. Samuel met her halfway down the aisle. In front of everyone, he offered his hand, not to guide her away, not to hide her, to stand with her. Elsie looked at that hand. She thought of the first night he had not touched her without permission, the blanket left on a crate, the meal called earned, the coat passed through Toby to preserve her pride, the badge laid down, the paper that asked instead of claimed. She placed her hand in his. The room saw. Let it see, she thought. Samuel's fingers closed around hers, warm and careful. Outside, the evening sun spilled across Cedar Ridge, turning puddles gold. The boarded saloon stood behind them, quiet at last. Ahead the wagon waited, and beyond it the road to Carter Hollow wound through green grass and cedar shadow. Toby ran ahead, calling that Queen would be jealous if they stayed too long. Mrs. Abel laughed and handed Elsie a wrapped bundle of leftover pie. Judge McCall told Samuel not to let the boy drive until he could see over the dashboard. Samuel helped Elsie into the wagon, then climbed beside her. He took the reins, but before he clicked to the horses, he looked at her. Home? He asked. Elsie looked at Cedar Ridge, the town that had mistaken her shame for her name. Then she looked north, where a cabin waited with flour sack curtains, a stove that held morning coals, a boy learning letters, a calf with a queen's opinion of herself, and a man whose cold heart had not melted quickly, but had warmed honestly. She slid her hand across the wagon seat and took Samuel's again. Home, she said. They rode out while the last light followed them, two hands held in plain sight, no longer hiding from the town, no longer owned by the past, moving toward a doorway where warmth waited and love had learned to speak in deeds before it dared speak in vows.